Good afternoon, everyone. Please have a seat. Good afternoon. President Biden, President Clinton, members of our cabinet, members of Congress, and our fellow Americans. Nearly 30 years ago, just outside in the Rose Garden, our nation took a long overdue step to give working people, and in particular working mothers, the dignity, respect, and support they deserve. Before then, many of us will remember, working people faced often impossible choices. The choice either to take care of a loved one or keep a job. The choice either to protect one's health or protect one's livelihood. But thanks to the Family and Medical Leave Act, millions of Americans since then have been spared these false choices. Everyone here understands the importance of being able to care for the people we love. On a personal note, when I was District Attorney of San Francisco, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and I spent many hours with her at the hospital and driving her to and from chemotherapy appointments. Fortunately, however, I had the type of job then where I could take the time I needed to be with my mother. But far too many others cannot. And let us be clear, in America in the 21st century, every worker should be able to take time off to care for themselves or for the people they love. And here's the thing we know. When they are able, our entire nation benefits. Consider, for example, women are 40% more likely to need family or medical leave because they are more likely to take on caregiving responsibilities. And studies have shown that when women receive the leave they need, they are more likely then to stay in the workforce, which means a stronger economy, raising wages for workers overall, and, by the way, raising profits for companies overall. It also means families are more secure, and our entire nation is more prosperous. Over the past half-century, the women's workforce participation has increased by 30%. That change alone has strengthened our economy by over $2 trillion. Just imagine. And there's still more work to do. So, as we celebrate this important milestone this afternoon, let us continue to fight to build on the Family and Medical Leave Act so that every worker can take paid family and medical leave. And now, it is my great honor to introduce a leader who had a vision 30 years ago that has benefited generations of American families. Realizing that vision was one of his central promises when he ran for president in 1992. And the Family and Medical Leave Act was the first bill, because of his priority, the first bill that President Clinton signed into law. And of course, it was possible thanks to another extraordinary leader who was also named Clinton. and a partner to the President, Hillary Clinton. And the work of President Clinton and what he did to inspire his entire administration was the work that then went on to include an administration that created the child tax credit, which has lifted millions of children out of poverty, an administration that expanded the Head Start program, and helped generations of children reach their incredible potential. An administration that signed the Violence Against Women Act into law. We want to thank Joe Biden. See, they've been on this stage together before. And an administration led by a president with an unwavering commitment to the workers and to the families of our great nation. Please join me in welcoming President William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Somewhere I'm supposed to have some notes here. These are the President Biden's notes.
I want just a little mine.
Why don't I just give your speech here? And you can give mine. I found it. Thank you, Madam Vice President, for that introduction and for your kind remarks about the work we did. I'm very grateful to President Biden for many things, but I thank him for asking me back to the White House to celebrate 30 years of the Family and Medical Leave Act. And as you showed by your enthusiastic response to the Vice President's remarks, what the Family and Medical Leave Act should tell us about our common future. The bill was the result of years of passionate advocacy and effort by so many people, none more than my friend of more years than we'd like to admit, Chris Dodd. So before I started running for president, I was a governor, but I was very interested in this issue, and I kept noticing that Dodd introduces this bill every year. And he introduced it for 6 years, I think, before it passed. So he passed it, it got vetoed. And then he passed it again, and it got vetoed again. And by the time I started running for president, I basically made it a part of my stump speech because I thought it both embodied what was wrong then by the polarized politics of Washington and embodied the hazards of overlooking the country when it's changed on the ground. What do I mean by that? The president and I and Nancy and Chris and all of us who are, dare I say it, 75 or older, we grew up in a different time. Well, we grew up in a different time. My mother always worked, and my grandmother did, but they were atypical. By the time the 1992 election unfolded, there were more and more families where both the mother and the father had to work to make a living, or where there was only one parent in the home with the children. In a situation like that, both the society and its political leaders look utterly hypocritical if they say, oh, there's nothing more important than raising children. Well, how about a little help to do it? Well, we can't do that. And so the rest of us followed the lead of Senator Dodd and the others in the Senate, and there were Republicans too that were for it. That was a different time. There were more than 200 women's, children, labor, and faith organizations led by the National Partnership for Women and Families. There were If you ever feel drifting, just ask Judy Lickman what you should do. She'll tell you. There were all these people in the business community who were progressive. They implemented their own forms of family leave because they realized it was good for morale, for productivity, for the long-term health of the business. Still, it took 8 years, 2 vetoes, and another election before it became law. But today, one of the most important things we can do is to remember that the Family Leave Act and every other thing that has really fundamentally changed this country that moved through Congress is an embodiment of what I learned from the World War I essay of the great German sociologist Max Weber, who said that politics was the strong and slow boring of hard boards. All these people bored the hard boards, and we are the beneficiaries, and we should all be grateful. And I kept saying that all the time when people wondered why, when the president took office, we didn't have the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Anti-Inflation Act, and all the climate change stuff in 15 minutes. And one of the reasons I was so happy when he got elected president is I watched him spend 15 years, if that's what it took, to make the changes that we needed to make this country a better place to live. So I think we should remember that. I also think you should know, Chris Dodd will tell you the same thing. After all these years, I still have more people mention the Family Leave Act to me than any other specific things I did. And no one ever talks about what gets all the press coverage. You know, the political process. How long did it take? Who got derailed? What went up? What went down? Nobody. They tell you their story. That's when you know, for good or ill, that we have united the country. Then my job is to introduce a storyteller. So I will tell you my story and the point of her story. First time I ever got on an airplane after I left the Oval Office. Boy, what a bummer. Somebody said, when do you really know you're not president anymore? They don't play a song when you walk in a room. And you're back on commercial air travel. So I'm taking the shuttle from New York to Washington. And this really compelling flight attendant with a very intense stare looked at me and she said, "May I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." She said, you know, my husband loves you. He's a jazz musician and he teaches music in school. So he was always for you. She said, but I really didn't care about you one way or the other until the Family and Medical Leave Act. She said, I have a sister, and we had the misfortune that both our parents were dying at once, one with cancer, one with advanced Alzheimer's. There's no way we could support them with care except because of the Family and Medical Leave Act. And I just wanted to tell you this. She said, I've heard all these politicians give speeches about family values. She said, I know how your parents die is an important family value. It was breathtaking. I never get on a shuttle after 20 years that I don't think about that woman. And then there's one other story. One early Sunday morning, I took a run out of the White House. I came back. I needed to go up and shower and dress, and Hillary and I were going to church. And I got there, and there was a young person at the White House giving a tour to a man and his daughter. She was obviously very ill. And I said, would you excuse me, because I'd really like to welcome you properly, but I need to go clean up and get dressed. And I had her taken to the Oval Office. So I went up, took a shower, came down, went in the Oval Office, you know, gave a little standard 2 or 3 sentence tour and took a picture. And then I was walking them back out onto the South Lawn. And when the daughter walked out with the guide, he grabbed me by the elbow, and I turned around. He had big tears in his eyes, and he said, you know, my little girl's not going to make it much longer. But he said, because of the Family and Medical Leave Act, these months I have spent with her are by far the most important time of my life. And he said, I am telling you this because I read all this stuff, I know what all the controversies are. He said, it is so easy for you up here to forget that what you do affects the lives of other people in ways you cannot imagine. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't been able to share this time with my daughter. Now, we're here first to celebrate the fact that now about 400 million times in the last 30 years, Americans have taken advantage of the Family and Medical Leave Act. And we're here because in spite of that, and in spite of the 2020 study that the Department of Labor did, finding that 95% of employers said that the Family and Medical Leave Act either didn't hurt or actually helped productivity, reduce turnover, and increase morale, there's still a lot of problems that cannot be solved without some form of paid leave. And we tried to at least get permission to use surplus unemployment insurance funds by state in the late 90s, and there was a lot of opposition to that. So people acted like, you know, once again the free enterprise system would collapse if we actually gave people a chance to take care of their sick relatives or be there when a baby was born or when there was some other terrible problem. So we need more stories. Not process, stories. People need to understand that as great as this was, there's still a lot of people left out. That's the real purpose of today. So one of the stories you haven't heard is Natasha Jackson's. And she's a pretty good storyteller. So I ask you to welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, President Clinton and Vice President Harris. I'm Natasha Jackson, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm here today with my husband, Josh. I'm honored to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Family and Medical Leave Act, as well as recent wins, including the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Which President Biden, thank you, signed into law over a month ago. This victory is personal to me, and I'm going to try not to tear up. When I was 3 months pregnant and the only woman working at a local rental furniture company, I asked my employer to let me do less heavy lifting. I thought it would be an easy yes. Instead, I lost my job. I was our primary breadwinner at the time. We just made a down payment on a house, but without my income, we had to back out of all of it. We then ended up homeless and needing emergency public housing, all in a matter of months. With fellow moms, including Miranda Legros and Lindy Trissler, they're here today, and we shared our stories in support of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So what happened to us would never happen to anyone else. I have 2 daughters, and I also have nieces, and I am so grateful that they and millions of workers won't have to choose between starting a family and keeping their jobs. And I am grateful that President Biden keeps fighting for us, for workers, for families, for our economic security, and for women like me. So with that being said, I am honored to introduce President Joe Biden.
Natasha, thank you very much. Folks, as I was sitting listening to everyone, I was reminded that back during a very, very important hearing on the Judiciary Committee when I was chairman, we were working on a very difficult subject. I won't mention it was a justice that was very conservative, and we were working very hard to keep him from being on the bench. He was a decent man, but his philosophy was not. And we had worked really, really hard, bringing in scholars from all around the country during the entire summer preparing for this hearing. And one particular person was in charge of knowing the detail, all the significant detail of all of his voting record. And just before we started the hearing, as a matter of fact, the day of the hearing, I heard that he was having difficulty at home with a marital circumstance. And but he kept showing up for the hearings. Mr. President, I told him that if he came in and continued to come in, he was fired. And the reason I did that was because I remember what happened to me. When I got elected to the United States Senate, I was 29 years old, and I had won a very close election against popular guy. Nixon won my state by, I think, 64% of the vote. I won by a whopping 31 or 3,200 votes, only because my sister managed my campaign. And the reason I won. But all kidding aside, I was down here in Washington in Teddy Kennedy's office. He was the whip at the time. On December 18th, hiring folks, and I got a phone call saying my wife and daughter had just been killed, and my 2 boys were very badly injured. They were in the car, a tractor trailer, hit broadside them. And I didn't want to come to the United States Senate. I really didn't. I had my brother and my sister, and Chris knows them both well. I asked them to talk to the incoming governor. We elected a Democratic governor as well. But we hadn't had what was referred to as a progressive senator in Delaware for a while because it was a very conservative. It used to be a red state. We didn't call it that then. But a group of senators who were really so good to me, saved my sanity, starting with Mike Mansfield and Tom Eagleton and the distinguished senator from South Carolina, Fritz Hollings, and Tom Eagleton, and they all said, come and just stay 6 months. At the time, I thought they said, you have to help us organize. We had 58 Democratic senators. That's how smart I was. But the point was that I started commuting every day, 260 miles a day on the train to come home with my kids. And that's because I was really, really lucky. I had a sister who's my best friend and a brother who's my buddy, 5 years younger. And they gave up where they lived and moved into where I was, helped me raise my kids. And every morning I'd drop my kids off when they were little at my mom's house, not far from ours. And I thought to myself, I was able to continue to work and continue to be paid because I had the option of being able to, I had a family that was so supportive and a universal family just around me taking care of everything. And I swore that since I was able to, and by the way, when you're a senator and you only have you have 1,000 bosses, but you only have one but you. And you make a decision if you're going to vote or not vote. And sometimes when there was an important event, a teacher meeting, not a joke, or a baseball game or whatever, I'd look and see what the votes of the day were, and if they weren't consequential, they were going to pass overwhelmingly one another, I'd stay with my kids. I'd go to the teachers meeting. And I thought to myself that, you know, if in fact I could do that, I was going to make sure everyone in my office, and so everybody who works for me gets a memo. And the memo says, if you ever need time, you never have to explain why. All you have to do is tell me you can't show up. I take you at your word. I don't want you to have to reveal what the reason is. If you don't, you can't show up, you can't show up. I'm trusting you that you're not going to play a game. Well, you know, there's so many people who can't. You know, Madam Vice President, I want to thank you and for all the women and families that are taking care of everybody. And I want to thank the members of Congress that are here working families. Chris, who I know as we've been friends a long time, is Christy. Christy, you're the reason for the Family Medical Leave Act. You wrote it. And this guy felt it in every fiber in his being when he was running, when he was governor, and when he became president. And by the way, welcome home, old buddy. He made history by signing that act and into law. And you know, as a team effort, I was especially want to thank my friend, as I said, Chris Dodd, but also that woman sitting next to him was a little bit helpful too. By the way, stand up for a second. Come on. I learned a long time ago. Just say yes. Have you ever asked me everything I just haven't said yes? Because I know I'm going to have to say it eventually. Please sit down. But all kidding aside, you know, Chris first introduced that bill, I think, in '86, if I'm not mistaken, the mid-'80s. And working with Republicans. Chris and I still have this weird idea you can still work with Republicans. You negotiated a bipartisan compromise to get it done. And meanwhile, along came candidate Clinton, and he not only signed it, but he convinced people why it was such a good thing to do. And it was a good thing to do. He knew in the United States that in America, no one should have to choose between their job and their family. Chris has heard me say this 1,000 times. My dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. And the American people agreed. Because of the years of work and the tenacious advocacy of many of you who are here today, of course, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, as a tenacious advocate as ever was, for this law as well. 2 weeks after President Clinton took office, it became the law. And it transformed the lives of literally millions of men and women. The law was a step toward that dignity my dad used to talk about. Dignity for working families. Dignity for workers who have serious illnesses like cancer, and parents and new children and aging parents, disabled family members. I mean, it makes a gigantic difference. Dignity for women who are so often responsible for caring for everybody else in the family. And dignity for men, because being there for your family is often the most consequential thing you can do. The most consequential thing, as the example that the president gave about that father he met. Dignity and security for millions of families, because finally, for the first time in history, a majority of working Americans could take time off work, care for somebody they loved, and care for themselves without fear of losing their job. To have a little dignity when they needed it most. And folks, and by the way, family medical leave isn't only for workers and families. As mentioned earlier, and I'll not go into the detail, but as pointed out by both my colleagues, it's good for business. It's good for business. And it's increased the overall GDP by well over $1 trillion. It's done a lot of really, really good things. When workers can take leave, when they're able to do that rather than have to stay in their job, they're better off, and the businesses are better off as well, because things get done. As a nation, we've made a lot of progress over the last 30 years. Over time, we've expanded the Family and Medical Leave Act, up to 26 weeks of leave to care for service members with serious illnesses or incurred on active duty. My son lay in the hospital for 18 months after coming back from Iraq and died. I don't know how, if I hadn't had this job, I don't know quite what I would have done. I don't know quite what we would have done. And so the fact is, up to 12 weeks to handle military deployments, because when the deployment occurs, it really changes a family and takes it all out of gear. And look, which can be a major adjustment for families. 12 weeks paid parental leave for federal employees. And then we strengthened protections against paid discrimination. We extended Medicaid coverage for new moms for a year postpartum. And I'm proud to say that under our administration, we've made additional progress. In December, as we mentioned earlier, we passed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It filled an important gap in federal protection by requiring employees to make reasonable accommodation for pregnant women and new moms, like letting them have water breaks, bathroom breaks, sit down and work breaks. Can you imagine asking that? My Lord. Think about it, though. Think about it. Too many women have been denied just simple basic support. Plus, this law gives new moms time off to recover after they've had a baby. That's considered a reasonable accommodation. I guess so. But think about it. We got to say that. I mean, a reasonable accommodation, like that's something we discovered? So workers don't get don't get family leave through Family and Medical Leave Act may now get parental leave through this new law. You know, and when I ran for president, I promised to get this done, and we keep our promises. Look, I also signed a law that gives nearly 9 million nursing mothers the time for private space to pump at work. Now think about it. What an awful demand. I mean, my Lord, salacious. Remember some of the arguments made? Until now, teachers, nurses, farm workers, and others were at the mercy of their employers. Folks, this shouldn't be that complicated. It gets down to a word I guess we Irish overuse. It gets down to basic dignity. It's about being a country where women and all people can both work and raise a family. And today, we're taking another step forward. I just signed a presidential memorandum to make sure that the federal government leads the way in supporting workers. Right now, employees only qualify for family and medical leave if they've been on the job 1 year. Get cancer after 6 months? Your wife or your husband? Look, I'm a great respecter of fate. And I know all too well that you can't schedule when your loved one might need your help badly. You can't tell a newborn infant or a dying parent that you'll be there for them next year. And when serious illness strikes, you can't reschedule that either. So today I signed a memorandum, all federal agencies urging them to let federal employees take leave during the first year of the job from the time they get their family leave. And I'm also directing the Office of Personnel Management to develop recommendations to help federal employees take leave when they need to find safety from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, so-called safe leave. That matters. It matters a lot. You all know it. Additionally, we made historic investments to make child care more affordable so parents can work and provide for their kids. How can we compete in the global economy if millions of American parents, especially moms, can't join the workforce because child care or elder care costs them more than their paycheck? The cost of child care has gone up more than 200% over the last 30 years. 200%. Most families' incomes haven't grown nearly that much. And a lot of parents do the math and realize they can't afford to go to work. The first major piece of legislation I signed, the American Rescue Plan, provided historic tax relief to millions of families to help cover children's costs through the largest increase in history of the child tax credit and the dependent care tax credit. The thing we don't talk about much either, it also helped 200,000 child care providers, many of them in small businesses, stay open during the pandemic, to continue to serve 9.5 million children during that period. Look, and these funds help increase pay for child care workers who are significantly underpaid. They're overwhelmingly women, especially women of color. And I just signed legislation that increases the child care development block grant by 30%, helping low-income families afford child care. But here's what matters. More than half the women in my cabinet, more than half the people in my cabinet, more than half of the women in my administration are women. You think, well, God, that's across the board. Well, let's go. 30 years ago, we ranked number six among advanced economies that the share of with the share of women in the workforce. You know where we rank today? 19th. 19th. This is the United States of America, for God's sake. Women are 50% of our a little slightly more than 51% of our 50% of our population. We can't reach our full economic potential if we leave half the workforce behind. Look, I ran for president. to rebuild the backbone of America, the middle class. You've heard me say 100 times, Wall Street didn't build America. The middle class built America. And by the way, unions built the middle class. So I come of a family that never very much benefited from a trickle-down economics. But when you build from the bottom up and the middle out, poor folks get a shot, and the middle class can live a decent life, and the wealthy still do very well. They still do very well. 2 years in the making, we're making real progress. These have been the strongest 2 years of job growth on record. Unemployment rate for women when I was sworn in was over 6%. It's now 3.6%. Black women and Hispanic women, unemployment numbers fell even greater. In my first year as president, we saw the largest one-year growth ever in women's participation in the labor force in nearly 30 years. Meanwhile, to disprove the notion this is going to cost the economy, the economy is growing. Wages are up. Over the last 2 years, more Americans have applied to start a small business than any year on record. Any year on record. And a critical part of that is creating an economy where all workers, including women, have access to jobs, education, training, and support they need to seize the opportunity while still being there for their families. Look, the legislation we celebrate today was an incredibly important step, but a first step. In the United States, still one of our only countries in the world that doesn't guarantee paid leave. One of the only countries in the world that doesn't. Look, as a result, 94% of our lowest wage workers, mostly women and workers of color, have no paid family leave at all, 94%. Meaning you can only take time to care for your loved one if you can afford to give up your salary. I remain committed to changing that and bringing the line with every single other major economy in the world by passing a national program of paid leave and medical leave. And by the way, American workers deserve paid sick days as well. Paid sick days. Look, I've called on Congress to act, and I'll continue fighting, as I know all of you will as well. No American should ever have to choose between a paycheck and take care of a family member or taking care of themselves. You know, I believe that one of the best ways to continue making progress is to ensure women are at every table where decisions are made. Every table, not a joke. I promised that my administration would look like America. As I said, my cabinet is the first majority female cabinet in American history. And we just heard from the first ever woman vice president. A leader in our administration for women's health, women's economic security, and equity for all Americans. And with her help, and so many of you who are here in this room, we're going to continue to make progress in the years ahead. I can honestly say, as I stand here before you, you've heard me say it before, I've been doing this a long time. I know you don't believe that, but I have. Look, I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Never. Never. We just have to remember who in the hell we are. I mean this sincerely from the bottom of my heart. We're the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity if we set our mind to it and we do it together. There's nothing we've ever failed at when we've tried. Folks, we got a lot of work to do, a lot of work. But I'm so happy to be able to welcome my president back to the United States Congress, back to the United States Capitol. And he's promised me that I'll be able to sit at my desk tomorrow. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.